Okay, keep it a few. Good evening, everybody. Very welcome to Words on Whiskey, episode 32. Just kick off with the news as we usually do. And the first bit of news is there's a new release from Teeling. It's actually their second release in their Wonder of Wood series. That's a series where attendees at a tasting back in September decided to hold a tasting in the distillery and pick their favorite whiskey from a number of unusual wood finishes. So the first one that was released was a couple of weeks ago, the Amburana cask, a 14-year-old single malt. But this second release now is a 15-year-old single malt finished in cherry wood. And it's bottled at 57.1% and available from their online store. So just go to teelingwhiskey.com and the price is €125 and it's an exclusive limited edition bottling only available from there. Other news, let's see, there's the Water of Life whiskey film, which is debuting as part of the Burns celebration. So from the 22nd to the 27th of this month, the film is being highlighted and shown online. So the website for that is wateroflifefilm.com. So it features some of the greats of the industry, mostly in Scotland, and really features the human stories that are told and the stories of those who are dedicated to bringing out great whiskey. Featured in that is Jim McHugh and Waterford's distillery there as well. So Mark Rainier is also featured on that. So that's a wateroflifefilm.com production by Greg Schwartz. So that kicks off on the 22nd, and that should be very interesting also. I think the tasting packs for those are sold out. But back to this evening's show. You're all very welcome. Thanks for taking the time to come and join us. We're very distinguished guests, well known in whiskey circles in Ireland and highly respected amongst his peers and amongst those in the industry. So let's kick off and just invite Conor into the stream. Good evening, Conor.
Good evening, Sergio. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Undeserved, I'm sure, but thank you all the same.
Very much deserved, very much deserved. You've very much been on the scene for a long time, both in hospitality and in the drinks and cocktails and Irish whiskey and societies and everything else. So I see you're down in the bar, your local bar.
Yep. There's no better setting than a nice open fire and to have a glass of whiskey and a bit of a fireside whiskey chat. So I was doing a talk earlier on today with the US, and the scene was set, and why not use this?
Yeah, well, it's a lovely setting, and I'm envious of the fire that you have there because I have no central heating where I am. And it is cold. But tell us a little bit about your background, Conor. You're a Waterford man originally, but you're obviously an adopted Cork man.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, as you mentioned, I'm from County Waterford originally. I'm from a village called Ardmore, absolutely beautiful part of the world. My dad's a dairy farmer. We used to do tillage many years ago. But a dairy farmer down in Ardmore. And I went to college, went to GMIT to do a degree in hospitality. And after my first year in that, we had to go away on a summer placement. And I ended up going to Acton's Hotel in Kinsale, and the rest is history. That was in '98, and I've stayed here pretty much since. I've left and traveled and came back, but I've pretty much been in Kinsale since then.
Yeah, I mean, you have in the past done a lot of traveling, but that's very much curtailed at the moment. So I presume the bar is shut down and has been for the last few months.
Absolutely. Bars all over the country are suffering immeasurably, especially bars that don't serve food. There was literally a 2-week window in the entire year since March that bars that didn't serve food could open. So, for Irish tourism, for all the people involved in it, I mean, the bar is a central hub for anybody visiting Ireland and anybody in communities, just to be able to get together. So it's a sad time. Hopefully, almost everybody will get back out through it and get the doors back open again. But it is an unmeasurable loss to the country.
Yeah, I mean, Kinsale particularly, I suppose, being such a tourist destination for so many, must be particularly bad. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Everything's locked down now, like country over. But even when there was glimmers of hope, and we got to open up whenever we did, different parts of the business, be it restaurants, be it hotels. To be fair, Irish people are great for supporting Irish, and there was a lot of great, whiskey tourism and just general tourism went on when it was allowed, and unfortunately, it's not to be at the moment, and we're looking forward to everyone getting back open again.
Yeah, we all are, and for sure, it's a lovely neck of the woods to go down and visit. If people haven't been down, it's well worth a visit, and particularly your bar, because it's an award-winning bar.
We were very lucky, I suppose. Except for the first year, we would have gotten a gold medal for an Irish whiskey bar of Munster. One year we won it outright. So it's great to have that accolade behind you. But I mean, that's all about the people, really. The people make a whiskey bar. Be it the people that come into a bar, be it the people who are serving the drinks behind the bar. Having a collection is only one thing. To be able to converse about it and to be able to educate people across the bar, that's I suppose that's the nucleus of a whiskey bar.
Yes, and I know your sister helps you running the bar there as well. So when you're off,
more than a little bit, yeah.
When you're off on your travels with Pearse Lyons Distillery, you're well placed as well, looked after.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've been in hospitality, you were telling me, for a long time. You started pretty early, and take us from your early days in hospitality to actually setting up the Kinsale Pokehouse bar.
I suppose, condensing it down, I literally started pulling pints behind my aunt's bar when I was 12 years old. Saw the inside of a bar then. My mum, she's passed now, but my mother was a chef, so there was a catering slant to her background anyway. Then I suppose at the age of 14, I started working in the kitchen that she was working in every weekend, all the holidays, prepping in the food side of things. Food I absolutely love it. I ended up working in kitchens for many, many years, and I absolutely loved my time working as a chef in kitchens. So that started when I was 14, pretty much full-time as much as I could. And then it came around to filling in your CAO kind of form. And at the time, Galway RTC at the time, it finished up as GMIT when I finished. They were doing a good business degree course in hospitality. I ended up doing that. And as I mentioned, I came to Acton's in Kinsale after my first year placement. And I was lucky enough that they asked me back at only the age of 20 to be a duty manager in the hotel there. Did that for a year, went back to college for another year, went back to Acton's as the bar manager for 2 years. And then after that, I went to Spain and worked as a chef over there in 2 different restaurants for 2 years. And while I was over there then, I had the opportunity, I got a phone call out of the blue that the Pullman Bar in Kinsale, an absolutely stunning location of a bar, it's a bar and restaurant, and the person who bought that had asked around, whatever. I got a call out of the blue. I came back and I managed that for 4 years. And then that brings you up to 2009, where I suppose the world was in an utter world of hurt economically. And I ended up leasing the Thebauhaus Bar then in 2009.
Yeah. So this is the bar here, Conor.
That's that direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously a very traditional, nice, well-stocked whiskey bar as well. So the whiskey element is called Malt Lane, is that right?
Malt Lane, yeah. There's a small kind of nuke kind of bar just on the back of this bar.
Right. Okay. And I think that's probably not far from where you are, or is there, have you got more than one bar place?
That's a wide shot of where I'm sitting right now.
Okay. Very nice. Very nice. So, I mean, you've also represented Ireland. Yeah. That's so the beard is gone there, Conor, is it?
The beard was gone there. The beard is probably just about 2 years old. So my brother, again, he started off as a chef, and now restaurateur. Would be involved in the Corn Store restaurants in Limerick and Cork, as I see him there, and the Cockbull restaurants in Limerick and Cork. So there's a big catering background in my family. There's 3 kids, and the 3 of us are involved in it.
Very good. And you represented Ireland as well in cocktail competitions across the world as well. This is the Havana Club one. So
that was, yeah. I suppose I was very lucky in 2016 for the Beefeater Mixed London 6 competition to represent Ireland, and I ended up in the grand final internationally, which was a huge honor to be. I mean, to represent your country at anything is amazing. To represent it at your passion in beverage is incredible, and then to end up on the in the grand final on the global stage is mad when I think back at it.
Yeah, no, a huge achievement, and well done on that. Do you find that also the hospitality sector and the food industry and working in kitchens as well and working behind the bar, has that had a huge impact on your appreciation of flavor and taste and combination of foods and cocktails?
Absolutely, all of them combined. If you're smelling a whiskey and someone says, "Oh, I smell papaya," unless you've actually smelled papaya, you don't know what it is. So I've been very lucky. Even at home when I was a child, with my mother being a chef, we were exposed to foods that you might normally be exposed to as a child. So having that time of tasting and sampling and exploring flavors has been a fundamental help in what I do now with building flavors with whiskies and gins, and then building and using them then in cocktails. I used to, I suppose, when I went around doing tastings in venues, I really pushed a lot to do food pairing tastings with our Pierce whiskies to show the versatility of them. Because you can make cocktails, which is one dimension to your whiskey tasting process. To be able to incorporate it into a whole meal experience allows, and this goes for Irish whiskey across the board. Irish whiskey is a phenomenally versatile spirit, more so than a lot of other brown spirits, because of the different categories of whiskey that we're allowed to put together, with us having pot still, grain, malt, and bringing them together in any combination that you like. Irish whiskey is phenomenally diverse in flavor, style, palate, and makes for great sipping, makes for great cocktail making, and people should never forget to include Irish whiskey, and Pierce Irish whiskies is what I specialized in talking about, of course, and making them part of a whole meal experience.
Yeah. What do you think are the secret of good hospitality then, and serving the customer and liaising with them and so forth?
Well, it's in the title, to be hospitable. It's to be welcoming. It's to be engaging. And to find out why people are with you, find out what they're looking for, and there's no point putting something into someone's hand that they're not going to enjoy. You should always take on board what they have to say about a drink, about a food item, and make sure that they get the best possible option for them, and something that suits their palate, their criteria, and give it to them in a, as we say, a hospitable way. Hospitality is all about friendship and relationships.
Well, that has to be backed up with good knowledge, presumably, as well. I mean, you need to know your material.
That's on the more specialized side of things, but I mean, hospitality is just about being friendly, hospitable, welcoming, warm, and of course, if you're serving something that's a speciality, be it food, be it gins, be it whiskies, rums, of course, background knowledge is key, and to be able to guide people to where they want. I mean, I love when people come in and speak to me about, I've drank this whiskey before. What do you recommend that's different? And, knowing what that whiskey is the pivotal point, whatever whiskey they referenced. So then you can bring them over to another version, another style of that whiskey, but from a different producer, to give them that rounded experience.
Yeah. How did you come to take such an interest in whiskey?
I suppose literally my first whiskey experience was probably when I was proper whiskey experience was probably when I was 19. Good friend of mine from Youghal, Niall, we're in a bar. He goes, let's have a whiskey. And at that stage, I suppose when I was 19, my first passion was wine. I absolutely love wine, and I still do. And I suppose fortified wines are a particular delight of mine. So he said, we'll have a Black Bush. I said, great. I didn't know what this Black Bush stuff was. And even to this day, Black Bush is probably one of the best mainstays of Irish whiskey that's available. I still enjoy it. So that's how I started tasting whiskey. And I suppose then just from working and it is a luxury that people in hospitality have to be able to smell and taste all the whiskies that come behind your bar, that other people will share a bottle with you. And I mean, to create the excitement, I suppose, in the category for yourself, you have to taste everything, taste them from many different countries, taste many different styles, and just see what you enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Well, a question in here from Tracy Spencer. She's asking you a question. What's your favorite Irish whiskey?
Well, that could be a very divisive answer. If we're on about Pearse whiskey, my favorite is probably the Pearse Distillers, the Pearse 7-year-old that we're going to taste in a minute with yourself, Sergio. I mean, I find that whiskey is like music. You can't. I don't have a desert island whiskey. If I did, it probably would be the Pearse 7. But I find whiskey very much like music. You know, if I'm listening to music, it depends if it's morning, evening, likewise with your whiskey. Depends on your mood. Do you want something light? Do you want an aperitif style whiskey? Do you want a heavy, robust, big wine finished whiskey? So pigeonholing it into one whiskey is very difficult. It's all mood dependent, and it's all situationally dependent, depending on if you're eating, if you're at a barbecue, if you're, and that's the great thing about whiskey. There's so many different options out there, and there's a whiskey for all times and all occasions.
Absolutely. There's one of the whiskeys. So one of the people here are asking about the name of the bar. It's the Thebauhaus Bar. The Bauhaus Nightclub, presumably, is that still active?
Yeah. No, well, nothing's active.
Yeah.
Everything came to a grinding halt in March of last year.
Yeah. Tell me, you also one of the founding members of the Cork Whisky Society. How did that come about, and what was your role there?
Well, I suppose Cork as an area was very lucky to have Liam Murray appear down to us. Liam Murray would have been one of the founding members of the Irish Whisky Society, very well known for establishing a whisky community within Kilkenny when he was in the wine centre. Liam's nose is a national treasure. I don't think people give it it should nearly be insured. His palate, his nose is incredible. And back I remember it was a rainy October evening in the Porterhouse in Cork. Liam Murray had put a thing up on Facebook to see if there was any interest in getting people together for a whiskey society. And there was a good few people turned up, maybe 12, 14 people to start this ball rolling back in late 13. And then at that, I met Eric Ryan, who we'll all know very well as well. And I suppose myself and Eric, starting off, became Liam's wingmen. And then obviously we were joined soon afterwards by Ray and Arnie and JP and now obviously Jolene and Laurie and Ori and Ofer. So we've got an amazing committee down there now. And I suppose what was great with the Cork Whisky Society was because of Liam, we were always able to do independent tastings. So we could collect really interesting bottles and bring them together. And we didn't always have to rely on a distillery tasting because societies were quite new back in 13 and when we really started off the Cork Society in 14. And I suppose we all brought our pieces of the puzzle together. It was great. I suppose me with the catering side of things, we glassware straight off. Liam, obviously an entertainer, a knowledge fountain that like no other. And obviously then Eric having the technical expertise from the distilling side of things. When it came about to talks and tastings, we were able to bandied them about between the three of us, and it made for good conversation and good crack. And I suppose the thing about the Cork Whisky Society, it was a very relaxed, and it is a very relaxed society where there was no judging of whiskies, there was no judging of people or what they said. It was just about people enjoying interesting glasses of whiskey, getting together and sampling in a nice environment. And I suppose as the Cork Whisky Society, with my Cork Whisky Society hat on, I suppose we have to immeasurably thank all the publicans in Cork that have entertained us and brought us into their venues, always free of charge. So, I mean, without their support and the venue support, we would have never got the society off the ground.
Yeah, look, it's a very active society, and you know, the variety of pubs that they do go to is amazing. And even, you know, some of the tours they do around the city there with Eric as well are brilliant. So we've enjoyed that. If anybody has any questions, by the way, please do feel free to ask Eric, Conor, any questions they might have.
Yeah, you got the wrong Ryan there. That Eric.
I know, Ryan, yeah, right. No relation.
No relation, but we're about 2 weeks apart. Liam Murray used to always call us the terrible twins because we're practically the same age.
Yeah. Well, I know Eric is very active as well, and look, and Laurie taking over, that should be interesting now. Yeah. I think he's got big plans for it going ahead. So, but then
big boots to fill after Eric. Yeah.
He has big boots to fill after Eric. All right, he does indeed. But look, I'm looking forward to being able to go down and hopefully go to one of the tastings when everything.
Yeah, you've been down before. We look forward to having you again.
Yeah, it's always a great trip down. It's a painful trip afterwards, but
the return journey is not as exciting as the journey down.
No, for sure. So look, you're based down in Kinsale. You started work with Pearse Lyons Distillery back in 2017, 18.
Before, kind of slightly off the grid. I kind of started working with them when they started bringing out Irish spirits. So about October, November 2016, and I suppose then I went full working with them in about June 17.
Yeah, and how did that come about?
Just a fortunate, accidental link up. One of the commercial managers, the sales manager with Alltech, Damien Kremen, I'd be friends with Damien. At the time, the distillery was just about to bring out the Halfpenny Gin, and as a brand of ours, and the distillery was about to come on stream, and Damien asked me in just to kind of have a chat, you know, to work up maybe tasting notes, flavor profiles, working with the blends for the whiskies, ended up working on our meal gin, which is a stunning brand. I absolutely love that whiskey, or that gin. That was a great project to work on. So just working on projects in the background and, you know, writing up notes and simple kind of things. And then when the distillery was opening up to the public then in June of 17, I'd kind of done the notes, done the whiskey components, done, you know, all that kind of thing. And I was kind of backing away. And then the other boss, Conor Farrell, was like going, you need to stay on board, and spoke to John Lyons and Conor and Damien, and I just ended up staying. It was great. It was kind of a fortunate meetup, and it's an amazing company to work with. And it's amazing to work with a family-owned, 100% family-owned distillery, and it's the only 100% family-owned Irish whiskey distillery in Dublin. And it's amazing to be that close to all the action within that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal story. It's a story you couldn't make up, you know, if you tried to. But, you know, it largely focuses around, it's the dream of Dr. Pierce Lyons. Yeah. And, you know, the more I read about Dr. Pierce Lyons, the more taken in and amazed I am about the kind of man he was. A phenomenal figure.
It's impossible to distill down all the information, pardon the pun, distill down all the information about Dr. Lyons in one conversation, because, I mean, an incredible man, an incredible contribution to the drinks industry internationally. Only a few months ago, he was awarded the Chairman's Award from the Irish Whiskey Association.
Yes.
That would be a mirroring of what would be the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame in in America.
Yeah.
And in 2018, he was indoctrinated into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. So he's the only man to get recognized at that level by those two whiskey institutions, both sides of the pond. So incredible. I mean, he started off, first man to get a Master's of Brewing Distilling in Ireland. He ended up working with Harp and Guinness. And then he was one of the engineers that worked on what people call the new Middleton Distillery that opened in 1975.
Yeah.
So he was involved in whiskey and making Irish whiskey way back then, back in 1975.
Yeah, an incredibly well-educated man. I mean, he has the brewing degree, but he has a PhD in microbiology down in from Birmingham, I believe.
Yeah, fermentation and biochemistry. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he started an MBA at some point, but I think he got drawn into the business side. So very much a very well-rounded to a very high level. Here he is with his wife Deirdre.
Deirdre, who of course was absolutely 100% should get and does get all the credit for our distillery in Dublin, the Pearse Lyons Distillery, looking the way it does. She did an amazing, meticulous restoration of that building.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a labor of love that, it went well beyond the estimated costs initially, but they stuck at it and they really created something amazing from a building that was, derelict and in ruin.
Yeah, we're very lucky. We've got some great awards for the distillery over the last couple of years. Best visitor center under 100,000 people. Top 10 visitor centers in the world from TripAdvisor. And what's fabulous about the Pierce Lyons Distillery is when you go in there, you can smell it, you can hear it. It's a fully functioning distillery inside an amazing location.
Yeah, I mean, you do your own milling there, you do the distillation, you do the fermentation, everything.
Except for the milling, we buy in the grist. We don't mill on site. It's the only thing that we don't do, but everything else from there up, obviously fermentation, mashing, distillation. It's all done on site. So fully functioning from start to finish in-house.
And of course, all this started back in late 70s, 1980, when he founded Alltech in the States. And Alltech is a biochemical, biofood company, but there's many strains to it. Yeah. So, he developed processes for fermentation and then transversed over to food products as well for animals. And the first distillery he set up was the Town Branch Distillery in Lexington, Kentucky. And I think after a couple of years sabbatical or a couple of decades sabbatical from the brewing distilling world, he went back into brewing in 1999 when he took over a closing down brewery in Lexington, Kentucky, and opened up Lexington Brewing. And then, and obviously for our US friends who are tuning in, they might be aware of our flagship beer, which is our Kentucky Bourbon Barrel Ale. It'll be the number 2 selling 4-pack in retail in America. It was essentially Pierce is making Irish style beer in America because he wants to bring a flavor of home to the US. And then decided I'm in the middle of bourbon country. Why don't I start aging my beer in freshly decanted bourbon barrels? And that's where Kentucky Bourbon Barrel Ale was born. And now it's a huge brand over in the US. And we're lucky to actually use barrels from there with our Irish whiskey. So that was in 99. And then in 2008, Pierce Lyons decided, okay, I'm in the middle of bourbon country. I'm buying barrels off other people. Why don't I make my own whiskey and use my own barrels to age my beer? So coming from a pot stilling background, brought over 2 Scottish Foresight stills over into Lexington, Kentucky. And Dr. Lyons being Dr. Lyons, instead of starting off producing bourbon, he always liked to do things a little bit differently. And the first spirit that he produced and the first whiskey he produced over in Lexington in 2008 was a single malt. And that was the first time single malt was produced in America since 1919, so almost 100 years. And now today we've got a 12-year-old, we've stock that's up to 12 years old. And that's not just the oldest single malt in America today, it's the oldest known single malt whiskey ever in America. And obviously over there we make single malt, we make bourbon, we make rye. Yeah, I'm sure he turned a few heads when he went over and brought stills over from from Scotland, and then started
Absolutely,
making single malts.
because we were the 7th member of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, but we were the only distillery at the time on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail to pot still only its spirit. Everybody else would use a combination of pots and columns, or just columns. And again, that was Dr. Lyons bringing his flair of Irish whiskey distilling into the heart of bourbon country and showing them there's a different way to do things.
Yeah, and of course, malt whiskey now is a huge thing in the States. Yeah. It's really taken off, and you have the oldest stock of it now as well, so that should be a good sign. And again, he kind of followed the pattern where he had a brewery and a distillery in the same location, and he also set up the latest distillery now as well, the dueling barrels.
Dueling barrels in Pikeville, yeah. So
what's going to be there?
Pardon, say that again, Sergio?
What's going to be the angle there with that distillery?
Again, at the moment, we've released Moonshine, or in Ireland, your Putgene style whiskey, your new make, your White Dog. We've released different variants of Moonshine. Obviously, the end game is to, once it's ready, to release another whiskey from that distillery.
Yeah. And ironically enough, the stills here in this photograph in the distillery in Dublin, they're from Kentucky.
Yeah, they're Kentucky Vendome stills. I suppose, again, when Dr. Lyons liked to mix things up, he went full bore at it, and we brought Scottish stills over to America to produce whiskey. So he decided, let's mix things up again, and he brought Kentucky stills, the Vendome stills that you're looking at there. He brought them over to Ireland in 2012. And what's interesting about those stills, and especially the spirit still that you see on the right with the 4 portholes, when that still was brought into Ireland, it caused a little bit of mayhem within the industry. Jack O'Shea, our distiller at the time, when we started distilling in 2012, he had an ongoing battle in order to get those stills written into Irish legislation. So something that we do know is we're after producing spirit. We have 8-year-old spirit now at this stage. We've produced spirit on stills that nobody else has, and obviously it gives your stills, of course, are going to give a unique character, and it's very interesting part of our story, and the way Dr. Lyons used to like mix things up in between and just shake things up a little bit. So yeah, and those stills that you see in the Pierce Lyons Distillery today in Dublin, they were set up initially in Carlow, down in OHaras Brewing. So while the church was being renovated, while the distillery was being renovated, those stills started operating down there in 2012. And I suppose a thing that people mightn't always know, or people who are new to our story, when we started distilling there, we would have only been the 6th functioning whiskey distillery on the island of Ireland. And it would have technically been the first distillery in Carlow in almost 200 years. And I suppose when that distillery was dismantled and then recommissioned back into the Pearse Lyons Distillery in Dublin, that would have made the spirit that came from the Carlow site technically spirit from a lost distillery, but a lost distillery for good reason, because it was moving from point A to its permanent home now at the altar of St. James's Church.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, those stills shared the premises of a brewery as well, OHaras down in Carlow, and now they've made their way up to Dublin and settled in that lovely setting. Of course, the success of Alltech as a business, it's a $1 billion business. It was profitable from almost day one. And, the project, they acquired the premises in 2013 because there is a link. It does have a strong family link with that church.
Absolutely. The church was decommissioned in the mid-60s. After that, it was an indoor veg market at one stage of its life, and people might remember it around the Dublin Liberties area as Lighting World. So Dr. Lyons and Mrs. Lyons, they passed it on occasion, saw it, and that church, as you said, has got a very strong connection to Dr. Lyons himself. The first funeral Dr. Lyons was ever at was in that church, and it was his grandfather's funeral. And he subsequently realized he's got 9 relatives buried in the graveyard at St. James's Church. Yeah. So there was a big spiritual connection to come there, but also, obviously, we're in Dublin 8, the Liberties area, the old Golden Triangle, the heart of brewing and distilling in Dublin, and that also drew him there. And also on his mother's side of the family, the Dunn side of the family, would also have had a cooperage around the corner in Smithfield. Pearse himself, before he got involved in whiskey, he would have had 5 generations of coopers before him. He was the 6th generation of his family to get involved in the Irish whiskey industry, and now his son, Dr. Mark Lyons, is the 7th generation, and he's after taking over the mantle. Mark himself, a master's in brewing distilling from Harriet Watt, so very involved in the operations and what we do. And as I mentioned before, being involved in a family-owned and run operation is a fantastic place to be.
Yeah, look, it's a fun. I always say that it really has become a landmark now, and especially with the, what do they call it? The lantern, the Liberty's lantern.
The Liberty's lantern, yeah.
The spire. The spire itself was taken down because it got hit by lightning, and it was due to fall down anyway. And Mrs. Lyons worked with the architects, worked with the Dublin Corporation to figure out how can we put a steeple back in this church that shows a new life or a new departure from what's going on inside it. So not keep an ecclesiastical kind of vibe, but to show that there's something new going on within it. And I suppose we like to say it's a shining light for Dublin distilling. Absolutely. And even look at even the glass, the stained glass in here.
Yeah, all those windows were bricked up. They had to be all chipped back out. Mrs. Lyons commissioned the glass with art glass in Derry, and each piece of the glass depicts a different story in the brewing and distilling part of the whole process of whiskey making. And the glass at the very back of the church then will have the story of St. James and the Camino de Santiago. So yeah. That's why the church is called St. James. That's why James Street is called St. James, because I suppose many moons ago that church used to be the starting point for people leaving Ireland to do the Camino de Santiago walk. And we're in Ireland, so there's a spare church across the road. So that is now the starting point for the Camino in Ireland. Yeah,
I mean that premises. It's the site of St. Thomas Abbey originally. 1190 was the original.
There's been a church on that site for 800 years, from when it was a timber church to when there was stone. I mean, the church as it stands today was built in 1864, I believe. Yeah. So there was many incarnations of church on that site. The church as it stands today, as I said, 1864, and it's incredible. I mean, for the restoration of that church, there was a quarry reopened in Wales to get the exact same slate for the roof. There was a quarry reopened in France to get the exact same limestone for the inside of the building. It's magnificent. I mean, the day we opened the doors, the place was in good a condition as it would have been back in the mid 1800s when it was built first day.
Absolutely. Look at even the roof. I mean, it's as much a story about a restoration and a gift to the city as it is about a distillery, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, only 2 weeks after the church site was bought, Dublin Corporation, in their wisdom, turned it into a national monument. So I suppose the planned 18-month renovation ended up becoming years, and the budget that went out the window. But look, proof of the pudding is in the tasting, and that is actually, I love that shot that you just put, that I can just see on the screen there.
Yeah,
it's just incredible. I never tire of going into the building and actually and seeing those stills set up in the church. It literally is a place like nowhere else.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly not many distilleries that are built in a church, for sure. But tell me the capacity of those stills. I know your annual capacity is about 100,000 bottles, so it's not a large scale production facility.
No. Look, we never went into a 24-hour operation. Hopefully, it's something that we can do down the line. We were lucky when we were distilling in Carlow that we were in the site of a brewery, so we'd literally an endless supply of wash. So the stills are capable of producing much more. We're restricted by the amount of fermentation space we have. Obviously, that was very heavily governed by Dublin Corporation because the building's a national monument. But there is the opportunity to increase that capacity with more shifts because it's a double, as you can see there, it's a double distilled spirit, and we're looking. Well, there's nothing wrong with having a small batch facility, and
look at the wooden fermentation tanks as well.
Oregon pine open washbacks. So obviously we'll start the process. It goes into steel fermentation first, and then it'll spend about 48 hours, maybe almost up to 2 days, open top fermentating in the open to the distillery itself. And people who've been lucky enough to, sometimes if they come in at the right time, people can sample the wash that the whiskey is, or that is then turned into whiskey eventually. And it's a very tactile experience to go into the distillery there. You hear it, you smell it, you can literally taste it as it's happening.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a historic part of Dublin, and the cemetery as well. I mean, that's so well maintained as well. 100,000 people buried in that cemetery, I believe.
Yeah, it's a very small footprint in there. Actually, you'll see sometimes there's gravestones, and you might just see a piece of it sticking up out of the ground, and that's not because it's broken. At some juncture in time, the place might have been filled in and they started again. And historically, inside in that church, it links back into the brewing and distilling heritage of Dublin in a big way. You've got the co-signer that co-signed Guinness, the lease on Guinness in there. You've got James Power himself, the man who founded Power's Distillery in Johns Lane. You've got Sylvester Costigan, Arthur Rainsworth, the people who would have sold the equipment to George Rowe. So amazing brewing and distilling history inside that graveyard alone. And the tour guides will tell you that as you're going around. And I suppose if people have a question and they want a little bit more information on it, they're more than well able to give you the whole background. They're much more knowledgeable than I am on the graveyard.
Yeah, it's I've done the tour a couple of times. It's great to be able to actually combine the inside and outside, because the outside, of course, is a completely different vibe. There's so much there to take in. But in terms of the manufacturer, you're fortunate enough to have a lot of control, or full control, I would say, over the distilling process and the fermentation process and the maturation, because one, you have your own casks from Town Branch that come over from Lexington, but of course, being a biofood company, you also have your own yeasts. Yep.
So we almost have every part of the process in hand, and we're adding to another part of that process this year. It's in the pipelines. So as it stands, obviously we only use 100% Irish barley to start with. We have our own proprietary yeast strains that we use to ferment the wash or the beer. And obviously they're distilled in our own unique stills. And then when the new make comes off the back, the majority of our whiskey is aged in ex-bourbon barrels. And we are in the fantastic position to have a synergy with our sister distillery, Town Branch in Lexington, Kentucky, where we get to bring over freshly decanted bourbon barrels, rye barrels. We don't use the malt barrels, but we also use the Kentucky bourbon barrel ale and Kentucky bourbon barrel stout barrels in aging our Pierce Irish whiskey.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal story. So if we look at what you do have on offer at the moment in terms of whiskies out, so this is your current portfolio then, Conor?
Yep. So our core range, the three whiskies that you're looking at there, that's our Pearse 5, Pearse 7, Pearse 12. Obviously, as people will know who watch this, when you put an age statement on a bottle, that means it's the youngest drop that's in the bottle. We actually would have whiskey that's quite substantially older in each of those. So our Pearse 5-year-old would be aged in our Kentucky bourbon barrel stout barrels. So that gives you like this kind of burnt malt smoky wisp to it. Also aged in our Town Branch bourbon barrels, and they're the elements in that. A lot of blends, or good quality blends, would be it's a blended whiskey, would be 80% malt. 80% grain, 20% malt. We go much more malt heavy in our blends. So that'll be 34% malt and the remainder is grain. In our Pearse 7-year-old, that would be, and the whiskey in the 5 is 5 to 7 years old. The whiskey in our 7-year-old is 7 to 9, 10 years old. And our 7-year-old would be our Kentucky bourbon barrel ale barrels, or Town Branch bourbon barrels, and then Oloroso sherry butts is what we use then to put into the 7-year-old. And the 7-year-old then would be 36% malt, so very malt forward. and we're honoured that last year our Pearse 7-year-old won Best Blended Irish Whiskey under 12 years old. So that was a great accolade for us to get for the 7-year-old. And then the 12-year-old, if you do the maths, we were not distilling 12 years ago, we were distilling 8 years ago. So the sourced whiskey, a double distilled malt that we use in that, so you can guess where that came from, a double distilled malt to go along with our double distilled process. But back in 2014, all the whiskey that we sourced was emptied out, decanted from the barrels they were in, and refilled into Town Branch bourbon barrels. Now, in Town Branch, we use about 17% rye in the mash bill for our bourbon whiskey, and that 17% rye gives you a beautiful ginger and clovey kind of spice. So I suppose it was, if you, for want of a word that's become trendy now that we haven't used, it's double oaked. It was in bourbon barrels, and we're back into bourbon barrels. And I've tasted it alongside other sourced 12-year-old whiskies, and I can read. It is definitely different. You definitely get the flavor elements that come from our own Town Branch bourbon barrel. So that one does have our own fingerprint on it, even though we didn't distill it ourselves. But the other two, the 5 and the 7, have our own whiskey in it, partially, that we have distilled ourselves back in Carlow in 2012, 13, 14.
12-year-old over the last...
Yeah, the 12-year-old, very good. Actually, you have a sample of the 7-year-old if you want to give it a go.
Yes, so you kindly sent me 3 samples, so I'm pouring myself the 7-year-old here. So tell us a little bit more about this one than Conor, if you wouldn't mind.
This, so, if you're not meant to have favorite children, but I suppose this would be my favorite in our current lineup, or in our core lineup. I suppose the versatility of this I can't overstate. It's a great sipping whiskey. It's great in your classic cocktails like your Manhattans, your old fashions, but it's also great in long drinks. And it pairs beautifully with food. This one here, and like all of our Pearse whiskies, is served at natural color. So I suppose if you pick up a Pearse bottle on the top right, if you're looking there, it'll say natural color. So all the whiskies that we put out are now and always will be natural color, because one of the building blocks of the Alltech company is the whole philosophy of naturally, and everything to be as pure as possible. And that's what was basically the key ingredient for success for Alltech, that it's all about doing things naturally.
Yeah. Is that part of the, if you were to describe the DNA of Pierce Lyons whiskey, how would you describe it?
What you always get from our whiskies, and we'll always try and keep it this way, is that we let the spirit shine. And I'm not using that as a bad pun tying in with the church, but we always want to show off the spirit and not have it heavily influenced by hugely sweet barrels. Obviously, making whiskey, it's all about the synergy of the spirit and the wood, because they're literally the 2 key elements, and time, of course. But there's a beautiful crispness about Pearse whiskey. There's it's always crisp, it's spicy. There's a delicateness to it. And I suppose getting the balance of the wood and the spirit together is hopefully something that will, even when we go into much older whiskies, we'll always try and let the spirit shine, because what we want to do is let people see and taste our own unique DNA, I suppose, our own bloodline into the Irish whiskey industry, and we have our own spirit. We like to show it off. So it's always going to be a key balance of showing off the spirit, the cleanliness, the crispness, and tying it in then and marrying it together with some really good barrel usages.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely spirit forward for sure, but it
is a 7 to 9-year-old, and that in itself is actually is a great balancing act, because as you said, we want the spirit to speak. It's 43% non-chill filtered and served at natural color, and all of the core range are 43% served at natural color.
Excellent. Yeah, no, a very easy drink actually, but it's nice to have something that's maybe not as sweet as we can be accustomed to, and that's unusual if you think that they're matured in Town Branch casks, which would have helped bourbon.
Yeah, Town Branch bourbon in a big way, and also Oloroso sherry. So it's the balancing act that everybody has to deal with in their own distillery. I think as a country, we've developed a serious sweet tooth for whiskies, and sometimes the character of the spirit gets a little bit lost. But I suppose I'm unusual, and we'll go back to the time in the Irish Whiskey Society or the Cork Whiskey Society with Eric and Liam. Eric used to always laugh because I was the guy who loved the grain whiskies or the younger whiskies. I'm absolutely fascinated and enthralled by being able to taste the spirit that the whiskey is made with, rather than having it completely cloaked in wood. And yeah, now my own palate is, I do love young whiskies and I do love spirit forward whiskies. So
Yeah,
it's very much to my taste.
Sure, yeah, very nice. A question in there from Kilkenny Whiskey Guild, probably one of the longest we've had in. Greetings from all at Kilkenny Whiskey Guild. Great to see Conor generously sharing his insights. Question: what would you like to see from the Irish whiskey industry as a whole to maintain and develop international relations over the next few years? A very fair question, and obviously
absolutely. And I suppose it's difficult to kind of, if you're only looking at Irish whiskey within Ireland, you get a slightly blinkered view of what's going on in Irish whiskey internationally. And obviously, everybody, like, we're making pot still ourselves. Pot still obviously is a uniquely Irish style of whiskey, which are mixed mash bills of grains, of malted, unmalted, etc. And we all know about that. I suppose getting the message out there about the versatility of Irish whiskey, about the quality of Irish whiskey. And to be fair, I mean, I've drank whiskies from all over the world, and I have drank very bad examples of whiskies internationally, but I've never actually drank a bad Irish whiskey. I think the quality that's in Irish whiskey is phenomenally solid across the board with nearly every brand, every SKU that comes out from any distillery. So we have to mind that as a collective, as whiskey producers. We have to make sure that the quality standard is there across the board, and then messaging Irish whiskey correctly internationally. Obviously, we're hanging off the coattails of the phenomenal job Jameson have done internationally for all of us. I mean, they have the lion's share of the sales, and they went and broke ground and got Irish whiskey known in all these various markets internationally. And it's just to follow up and show people that there are other expressions, there are different expressions, and there's not one style of Irish whiskey which is brilliant. You've got pot, malt, grain, and blends.
Yeah, I think it's the diversity that we're starting to see now, not only in blends and single malts and pots.
Because if you're just looking at Irish whiskey in Ireland, you'll get a almost a falsely inflated view of how well Irish whiskey is doing. It's only when I started traveling internationally and I was over in anywhere from Asia to America, and you realize how little Irish whiskey is known about in all these different countries. They'll actually know Japanese, and obviously hugely amount they'll know about Scotch. But it's getting the message out there that Irish whiskey isn't just for mixing. Irish whiskey isn't just for shooting. That there are quality products out there that'll suit every budget, every palate. And I think Irish whiskey has probably the widest flavor profile of any whiskey on the market internationally. So I think we're very lucky to be in the Irish whiskey industry, because I think Irish whiskey can and will go back to its world domination point that it was at, and that's what we all hope for.
Yeah. In terms of the perception of Irish whiskey, because as I say, you've traveled extensively throughout the world. What are the challenges for Irish whiskey abroad, and how is it perceived in general, and how is that changing?
I suppose, carrying on from what I was just saying, education is key. Letting people know that Irish whiskey is a quality product, that there is quality offerings, and there is huge diversity in it. Like, one of the things that Irish whiskey can do that other whiskey countries can't do is age in wood that isn't specifically oak. So it allows for great diversity. So we can age in all sorts of wood. Obviously, our minimum aging requirement is 3 years. But I think now that Irish whiskey is and Irish whiskey distilleries are coming of age, I think now the swapping of spirit, which is something that'll be quite alien to the Irish whiskey landscape. That's very much so done in Japan and very much so in Scotland and in America, actually. That like when we brought out our Marriage of Malt, which is a vatted malt that we brought out in February, it was one of the first examples of a vatted malt seen in Ireland. And I suppose people would go, why did we bring out a vatted malt when we have our own malt? Why didn't we just bring out a single malt? Because as people will know, a single malt just means it's 100% malted barley whiskey from a single distillery. A vatted malt or a blended malt is 100% malted barley whiskey, but from 2 or more sources. Now, when you start bringing spirit together from different distilleries, you're also adding flavor and adding nuances to your own whiskey that you mightn't have as just a standalone spirit by itself. So instead of us just always running to the barrels and the woods, we can add diversity now, and it's because distilleries have because we have multiple source spirit now, and it allows for bonders and allows for bottlers and allows for distilleries themselves. If you kind of park up preconceptions and like what we did, and we are a distillery and we have our own whiskey, and we weren't afraid to bring spirit in from another whiskey. Now the Marriage of Malt was 66% our own malt, and the remainder then was 2 versions of a source malt. So it was a great exploration into flavor and into just making something different and making an Irish whiskey different.
You know, I just can't wait for the day when we have 30, 40 distilleries out there, and you know, it just widens so much the palette from which we can choose from to produce something unique, you know, and combining it with your own, taking 3 or 4 different combinations, blending them together. I mean,
we've reached that point, thankfully, and I think only last year, obviously, you know, we brought out we called it the Marriage of Malt, obviously, we blended malt. Then there was another one came within weeks. We've seen a vatted grain. So I think that marrying together of distillate from multiple distilleries has started nicely, and I think it's just another way to add flavor. And I hope distilleries that actually have their own spirit aren't afraid to experiment with it now and then, because it just, again, adds diversity.
Yeah. Quick question in here from our friend Conor up north. Do you think cocktails could help Irish whiskey brands out to get new customers into the brand? And of course, with your cocktail background, I'm hoping you should be able to.
No, the answer is 100%. I mean, you don't decide one morning to go from drinking wine or drinking nothing or drinking beer to start sipping whiskey neat. Cocktails are a phenomenal way to introduce people to the category that is Irish whiskey, and through long drinks, short drinks. Even if people, you know, let's say they only drank bourbon and they wanted to kind of migrate to an Irish whiskey, making an old-fashioned style drink with an Irish whiskey, over a good spicy Irish whiskey like our Pearse 7-year-old, using something like that instead of just a classic bourbon rye combo. And you know, the old-fashioned is always in the top 3 cocktails in the world, consumed internationally, and it's literally just a combination of a small amount of sugar, bitters, and citrus peel. Cocktails have a huge part to play in the development of the Irish whiskey category, and to introduce the Irish whiskey category to a wider audience. And I suppose once people start drinking it in cocktails, they become less afraid of the spirit. They start getting a background flavor for the spirit, and it hopefully will bring them into investigating, tasting the spirit in its neat form, and then deciding what to do with it after that.
Yeah, I have another question in then from Ryan Sheridan. You can answer this. So there's a good bit of talk about the Irish technical file at the moment. Are there any changes that you think should be made, and should it be kept to improve or maintain the category?
The Irish whiskey technical file is obviously hugely important. You have to have a benchmark. You have to have a standard. Like everybody's kind of bashing the technical file at the moment, but there really is one main bone of contention with people, and it's the limiting of the 5% other grains in the pot still mash bill. And I think that's on the way out, I hope. The Irish Whiskey Association has opened up the platform to its members to submit their perceived and recommended changes for the technical file. Now, this has to be supported by historic documentation or historical references. And we're all super fortunate that the amazing Fionn O'Connor, as part of his PhD study, I mean, even over there I can see his book A Glass Apart. We're all phenomenally lucky that we have the likes of Fionn O'Connor, and pretty much spearheading it is Fionn, in investigating, rooting through the archives, the national libraries, just like sniffing through all these old books and ledgers, and finding historic mash bills. And these historic mash bills are now, that should have been the precedent when the Irish Whiskey Technical File was written first. It was limited to 5% other grains because there wasn't as much, I suppose, interest in the pot still category. There wasn't as much interest in diversifying it with the members that were there at the time. But there's a much bigger pool of distillers now. There's a bigger interest from the Irish whiskey drinker, which is phenomenal, because ultimately there's no whiskey distillers unless people are drinking whiskey. So obviously we as whiskey distillers have to listen to our customers, and I suppose the Irish Whiskey Association and then the other powers that be, that when that gets pushed along, we'll have to listen to the whiskey distillers, and hopefully we will get that. And that's the main crux or bone of contention in the Irish Whiskey Technical File. I think the technical file is fantastic in the majority of it, but all the grief and all the giving out is based around the 5% other grains, and that traditionally wouldn't have been the case. Hopefully they'll open it up to having up to 30% other grains, and then that will be a great place to be. So the technical file is great. It is being revised at the moment. Whether it actually comes into play now, we won't, time will tell. We'll know over the next few months as time goes on. But I think if that amendment's made, I think the technical file will be perfect in what it does to protect Irish whiskey. Yeah.
Tell me, you sent me over 3 samples. We've touched on the one so far, and I'm dying. They're sitting here looking at me, and I really need to put them into a glass, because that would be a shame not to get through them. But so which one are we going to go to?
You're going to go with the 3-year-old. What I want you to do is taste something that nobody else pretty much would have tasted outside of the distillery.
Is this the 62.19% one?
That's exactly that.
Yeah. You could have been a bit more accurate on the percentage of ABV there, Conor, but 9 is important when you're at. Yeah, so I have.
So what this so I have mentioned that we have up to 8-year-old spirit now, but what I wanted you to try was now obviously it's still in its infancy somewhat, but a whiskey that we would have distilled on the stills that are in the church today. So this whiskey is a whiskey from the Pearse Lyons Distillery in Dublin, not the Pierce Lyons company when we're based in Carlow. So what you're looking at here is not long over 3 years, and with this, at about the 2.5-year mark, we put it into virgin oak barrels from Kelvin Cooperage over in the USA. They're the cooperage that we get all of our new virgin oak barrels in the USA, and we just gave it a 6-month or so finish in those barrels. And again, I just want you to taste the quality of the spirit, and just give you something that isn't readily available or you wouldn't get your hands on normally. And again, it's just to, I suppose, show that there is other spirit coming from the Dublin distillery that we're going to bring out, and it's on the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could tell it's young immediately, but
super drinkable, even at the 62%. I mean, I just drank that neat, and it's just spicy.
It's spicy, and it's caramelly and sweet, and yeah, and there's a lot of depth in there, a lot of complexity in it.
And we're very happy with it. The malt whiskey that we've been producing off those stills has just been incredible. And I suppose we mentioned Ryan asked the question there, and we mentioned the technical file. I suppose this year predominantly we've made pot still whiskey, but actually the majority of the pot still, even though we can't call it pot still, has been non-GI compliant pot still. So we've worked with many mash bills that would be above the 5% other grains. Obviously, when that comes out at the other end, it'll only be able to be called Irish whiskey unless the rules change around it. We won't be able to call it pot still, but it would be more traditionally pot still whiskey than, I suppose, the 5% allowance. So whenever we do a campaign of grains, we will do a campaign with the 5% allowance, and then we'll do a campaign with, you know, up to 25-30% of other grains in it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm picking sultanas out in this as well. There's no sherry at all to this, though, is there?
No. So this is town B1. So first fill town branch bourbon barrels, and then 6 months in. It'll be a char 4 crocodile skin char on the inside from Kelvin Cooperage.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So that's where you're getting those rich roasted sweet notes.
Yeah. Very rich, very easy to drink, actually, considering.
At that ABV, yeah, we're delighted with this.
62. Yeah. Very good. In terms of the non-GI compliant pot stills, how are you going to balance creating GI compliant and your other brands, your other releases?
When they come out, if the rules haven't changed, or if you're not allowed retrospectively call it something different, it'll just be released as a Pearse Irish whiskey. Because even if it's not GI compliant, you can call it Irish whiskey. It just won't be called pot still, malt, or grain.
Yeah. Well, I just want to touch on that point, and I'm only playing devil's advocate here, because if it's called Irish whiskey, is that enough? If it's non-GI compliant, does it really matter? Or not in terms of,
Not if people understand what they're drinking. Obviously, there's a lot of preconceptions around whiskey in general. You know, people love seeing the word single in front of a statement of whiskey, be it single pot still, single malt. It's a perceived point of difference that elevates the quality of whiskey. I mean, there's no reason why we couldn't call it single distillery Irish whiskey. You know what I mean? People like to see the word, but I suppose that's up to us as a brand, us as a whiskey maker, to let people know, and how we let people know what whiskey is in that bottle. Because down the line, if the laws don't change, it'll just be called Irish whiskey, even though it would probably be a pot still in a different world.
Yeah. Very good. Now there was a third sample here. Now this one, I can read it out, but I won't. You do the tell us about this one. But this is exciting actually as well.
Yes. So
57.98% only.
Yes, that's because it's got a few years of aging in it. So what we've got here is actually our next release. This will be coming out in the next couple of months, date to be confirmed. This will be a very, very small release whiskey in the 600 odd bottle kind of realm. We'll be looking at a small amount of cask strength, and we'll be looking at the remainder coming out about 47-48% ABV. This is a very interesting whiskey because what we did with this was it's been aged from new make in ex-peated barrels.
Yeah.
So from day one, it's nearly 7 years old, but it probably will come out as a 6-year-old. It was aged, as I mentioned, in ex-peated barrels. So you will have a lovely, delicate, smoky note to it. But then it spent 20 months in a very rich fortified wine from France called Bagnols. Yeah. So very rich, chocolatey, fruity, fruit-driven, fortified dessert wine from France. And I suppose actually when I tasted this whiskey before it went into the Bagnols, it was much smokier than it is now. The extra casking has brought down the smoke level in it, but this is great. I mean, this whiskey, it's from our Pierce Lyons own stills while they were in Carlow. So it's I suppose technically it's from a lost distillery, and I think it's a beautiful example of whiskey in general. And I'll be very proud to have the Pierce name on this bottle when it does come out.
Absolutely. I mean, I held off opening these until now just to try and give it an honest view. But, you know, the first thing on the nose is phenomenal because I actually get, you know, when you open the wooden cigar boxes.
Cedar, yeah.
Yeah, that's the smoky note I get in it. So it's not really a strong iodine-y one. It's very subtle, the iodine-y one.
This is absolutely gulpable at cask strength even, and the cask strength, as I said, is just under 58% at the moment. And yeah, I did a sampling of this for the online Whiskey Live with it. You know, when we all got together and did that. charity event with, obviously, hats off to Ivor and Laurie and Omar for putting that together, because that was an amazing piece of work that they had to do to put that together. But yeah, we sampled this and I got great feedback from it. So that's why we're plowing ahead and delighted that we get to do this, I suppose. So that's our next release.
Okay, I get the creme brulee and kind of banana off it as well, but it's amazingly viscous.
Yeah.
As well.
When you get a viscosity like that, you know that the barrels that have been used are fantastically fresh. You know, you get a great oiliness from really good barrels. And sometimes that oiliness doesn't, and you get it with the smokier style of whiskies, and that oiliness doesn't always equate into a younger whiskey. Normally when whiskey is like 10, 12 years old, you can get you start hitting into the oily notes from the resinous characteristics from the wood. So yeah, this has been a great synergy of spirit and wood here, and very excited. And actually, as you bring, sorry, Sergio.
When can we expect to see this one out?
In the not a matter of months, kind of springtime, kind of go well before the summer. We've a few releases planned for this year. I suppose when we brought out our single Pierce 5-year-old single malt there 2 years ago, like that was our first expression of 100% our own whiskey. And when it came out, it would have been the first new 5-year-old age statement to appear in nearly 25 years on the market. And when we brought that out, we used a lot of second fill barrels. We wanted to show, even though it was 5 years old, it was spirit forward, because we wanted, I suppose, show Irish whiskey drinkers this is the whiskey to expect. And now we waited a little bit longer, and now we've got a great repertoire of whiskey in different barrels, and now we're ready to start bringing out multiples of small releases, because the whiskey is of a good age that's seen the inside of some really good barrels, and we're very excited to show it off to the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really like this. And of course, peated whiskey is making a real resurgence over the last year and a half, I'd say.
And this was started by Dr. Lyons himself back in 2013. He was thinking, let's not do a peated malt, but let's put it into a peated barrel from new make. And we're drinking his creation today.
It's amazing. I mean, he's such a visionary. When you think of the size of a company like Alltech, thousands of employees, and this was obviously, I won't say a pet project, but it was certainly something very dear to him that he was heavily involved.
And that was it. He got to go back to his first love, his first passion, which was brewing and distilling. He had the time, he had the opportunity, and starting off in Lexington in '99, and then coming back to Irish whiskey in 2012, it really was a dream come true for him to see his vision come to fruition when it did.
Yeah, of course, it was very sad, tragic almost, and so unfortunate that to pass away 2018 before you really got to see the fruits of his labor.
If you saw the delight on his face, I mean, when the distillery when the distillery opened up in June and right up to his sudden passing, he'd be in the distillery for a few days every couple of weeks, and he'd be hanging off the washbacks that we saw there earlier on, and he'd be like waving people in, come here, I'll tell you what's happening here. He was just absolutely delighted to tell people about the fermentation story, tell people about the whiskey story. And the Lyons family, always say to us, in the Pearse Lyons Distillery, whiskey is only part of our story. It's about our whiskey, of course, but it's about the history of Dublin. It's about Dublin liberties. It's about St. James's Church. And I suppose we've been given the brief and given the responsibility of telling that story in its entirety in the Pearse Lyons Distillery.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel that responsibility, Conor? Do all the team feel that responsibility?
Absolutely. We're very lucky that a lot of the people who are still there today started day one in the distillery when it opened up, and there's a great shot of the opening up team on the stills of the altar that we have internally, and I love seeing it because the delight in Dr. Lyons' face to have had the place opened up, and as I said, to see his dream come into fruition.
Yeah, I mean, talk about leaving your legacy. He's certainly done that. Tell me, what else do you have in the pipeline? What other developments can we expect from Pearse Lyons Distillery?
So we have, as you mentioned, we've plenty of limited releases ready to go because we're looking at respectably aged whiskies now and really good barrels. I suppose the most exciting development for us this year, I know you mentioned earlier on that we've got complete control over our process.
Yeah.
We were 90% in control, or even less, but we'd almost every piece of the process in our own control except for one, and that was the malted barley, or that was just the grains, we'll say.
Yeah.
So hopefully starting off, there's a few I's to be dotted, T's to be crossed. Hopefully we're endeavoring on a very, very, very exciting project for ourselves from now and for forever, I hope, that come this planting season, we're going to be planting our own grains and we're going to be growing our own barley, predominantly with smaller inclusions of wheat, rye and oats. And we'll be growing them ourselves, and we'll be growing them with Alltech crop science products. So now we're going to have a 360 control over everything in our process. So as we mentioned, we cultivate our own proprietary yeasts. We age in our own, predominantly in our own Town Branch bourbon barrels. Now the grain element, we're going to grow it ourselves with our own crop technology products. We're going to be able to monitor its growth on a daily basis, and we're going to get it micro malted, obviously separately from bulk grain, even though we've always used 100% Irish grain, which is obviously the place to be. But now we're going to be growing our own grain ourselves.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. Yeah. So, I mean, will that mean that you actually control what variety of barley is grown as well?
Yeah, well, look, the bulk of it, the land has to be properly surveyed. The bulk of it's going to be, a 2-row barley, but with previous tests and with the Alltech crop science products, you're looking at a higher starch yield in the grains of barley. Could be 25% more starch within those grains and usable starches. And of course, starch is what you're looking for as a brewer or distiller. So the bulk is going to be barley. Obviously, we're going to malt a portion. We're going to malt a good portion of that. Keep some of it raw for pot still, and we're going to try and include wheat, rye, and oats as well in the inclusion. So this will be I suppose, a control over your own supply chain like no other. I mean, lots of people will have certain elements of it, but even down to growing it on your own land with your own crop science products, making the whiskey with your own proprietary yeast and aging it in your own barrels. It's an incredible 360 closed loop where we're going to have complete control over everything we do in the whiskey making process.
And of course, that's a huge plus in terms of transparency and traceability and being able to show everything.
Well, there's literally everything. There is nothing we can't show.
Yeah. So that'll be something that we see the fruits of 3 years down the road. I mean.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, we'll document the process from setting the seeds. Come March time, hopefully we'll start seeing some imagery go up, and hopefully we'll be distilling with that grain. September, October time.
Yeah.
So it's tangible and it's quick, and we will see it coming down the stream very quickly.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it differs from what you have as well. That'll be the nice thing. But yeah,
I think the key to it will be our own Alltech crop science products. Because to be fair, the grain that we are using is it's grade A distiller's grade, the same as what anybody who sources good quality Irish grain is using. We will have a higher starch yield from the products that will be used to grow, the organic products that we're using to grow it with, and it'll just be great that it's all within the Pierce Lyons core family of businesses. From the yeast to the crop science to the distillation to the maturation. It's an amazing story for us to be able to tell and to be able to share with you tonight. Actually, we haven't even signed off on it properly yet, but it is happening.
Yeah. So presumably that it is happening. You can't tell us exactly where it is yet, but it's on this side.
I'd be 95% sure where it's happening, but we just won't say yet. But the plan is to grow it on our own land as well.
Excellent. Well, that should be really interesting to be able to tell the story of from grain to glass, literally. So
literally, literally from grain to glass. Yeah.
What do you see as the future then for Pearse Lyons Distillery, and I suppose Irish whiskey ultimately?
That's a very broad stroking question. I mean, what anybody wants to do, and especially, you mentioned the word legacy many times this evening.
Yeah.
Like, we're entrusted with the legacy of Pierce Lyons. It's the only product in his whole portfolio of products that carries his actual name on it. So obviously we want to consistently deliver a quality product where there's a credibility, a heritage, very much all about the heritage of the whiskey and the man. And we're very lucky that obviously that Mrs. Lyons and Mark Lyons are very much involved in distillery and what we're doing. And it's about creating a strong, credible, reliable brand, and a brand that hopefully people will enjoy having a little drop of every now and then.
Yeah. Well, look, people that know you, Conor, see you as a highly credible person as well. And I'm sure for you, it must be a dream come true to see the product come out and change the way it has been produced as well, and see the origins of it come through and be able to control so much of the.
It's been fantastic. Like I would look after the cask program now, obviously, for the whiskey side of things. Like this, I've been waiting for this 6-year-old to become ready for 2 years. Now, whiskey is a long game. 2 years isn't a big wait for a whiskey in whiskey terms. But I remember when we're deciding, okay, we have this peated element whiskey. What are we going to do with it? I said to the other Conor, the boss Conor Farrell, I goes, I want to put this into Banyol's barrels, and Conor himself would be very educated in the wine side of things, and he was like, great call. That's what we'll do. And we've put it into these wine barrels, and it's great to see how that whiskey has taken its journey. From being just a straightforward bourbon, ex-bourbon barrel aged peated whiskey, and then being able to get to decide on the barrel that it gets finished in. And absolutely, it's very exciting. And it's great to be in a company that allows that freedom to me to put these whiskeys together.
Yeah, I'm certainly not aware of any Irish whiskey that's ever been finished in a French Banyol cask. That's
it wouldn't be normal, but I'm sure if we search through the memory banks, there'll be something somewhere. But it would be an unusual fortified wine to use in modern day Irish whiskey making. Yeah.
Yeah, Conor, I just want to kind of go out on a note really here and show some of the features of the distillery, because when you see the distillery in this light, you kind of say to yourself, well, bloody hell, yeah. This is the Liberty's lantern on St. Patrick's Day, so I know the light can be changed, so you can have it green in different colors, and I think this is Chinese New Year. But
also I think we went red for when the Star Wars film was premiered in Dublin. We gave people the option. And yeah,
they went to the dark side and voted red.
Yeah,
that's not like whiskey.
It's not like, yeah, exactly.
But look, it's a phenomenal story. I can't get my head over, because it is much about Dr. Pearse Lyons' vision, because
absolutely
he brought life to an area where there wasn't much, and I suppose you're saying bringing life to a cemetery and a church might be unusual, but that area of Dublin, of course, has hugely been revived. But Dr. Lyons was he was a marketer, he was a businessman, he was technically
he was a scientist, and he really had the gift of oratory as well. If you were in a room, and actually you've been in a crowded room with Dr. Lyons, He knows how to engage, and I suppose when he spoke to actually another thing, I mean, you're in a crowded room, he holds a great crowd, and always has an amazing points to get across and really engaging. And what I always loved, after those events, He always made a point of getting around to as many people as he physically could in the time allowed. He loved meeting people. He loved engaging with people, and he loved telling people the brewing and distilling story.
I mean, I had several conversations with him, and I feel very fortunate, and I was very fortunate to share some, great encouragement that we received from him, and words of advice and so forth. But what's more is he was obviously he created a huge empire, but he was very much a philanthropist as well, and we don't hear the half of what he contributed to, because he wasn't one to be a philanthropist and
talk about it. No, but yeah, I mean, very much so. Very spiritual man, and very much, and the family likewise. Very, very. We heard incredible stories after his passing, and that's the unfortunate thing. You only hear these stories a lot of time after someone's passing, about all the incredible work that they've done, the charity work that they've done, the giving away of their time, the giving away of paying for facilities, paying for equipment, paying for schools. You can talk for hours, but
the arts, the equestrian sport, education, everything. Like, he really, and like you said, we don't hear an awful lot about it, really. And
building schools, setting up a fair trade coffee plantation down in Haiti after the disaster down there. Just the list is incredible, and if you Google it, you can find it. But very much felt part of giving back was part of life. He done well, and he wanted to give back.
Yeah, well, he certainly did that. In terms of what you do, Conor, I mean, you're an incredibly busy individual. You're involved in this, that, and the other. What do you do yourself to unwind and relax? I know you're married and you have a young one.
Well, I don't have a young one. I've got a young child. Having a young one could get me in an awful lot of trouble if my missus is watching. So yes, I've my wife Mary, and I've got almost a 2.5-year-old son called Mikey, and and pretty much any time that I have that's not thinking, writing, talking about whiskey and gin, I just spend time with Mary and Mike. And I suppose this downtime that we've had of the not traveling, I'm getting memories up on my pictures and stuff like that. And you're this time 2 years ago, you're in this country, and this time a year ago you're in that country, and it's mad to think how the world has changed. But you know what? There have been some silver linings to it, and one of them has been to be around more, to see the small fella growing up and changing. Otherwise, even if I wasn't traveling, I would probably be in Dublin 2 days a week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any given week, if I wasn't out of the country. So the silver lining is that, and I suppose it's not really unwinding from the business, but when I'm also not working, I'm usually reading something that's about nosing, tasting, history, whiskey, different spirit category. And I've always been like that. I mean, when I get into something, I really want to know as much as I possibly can. I mean, I used to read books that thick just about Bordeaux wines when I was starting off in catering, or getting into the wine side of things when I was 18 or 19. I just love compiling information, because it just all adds to your balancing your view of the drinks industry.
Well, look, I mean, you've always been very generous in sharing your knowledge, and you've always done it in a very nice, gentle way, without, making some of us feel ridiculously stupid. But
no, yeah.
But look, you've done a tremendous service, I think, to the hospitality, the cocktail, the Irish whiskey sector, and of course, Pierce Lyons as well. I'm sure it's a great combination, the two of you. And I suppose if you're looking at these steeples, as people say, anything that makes you look up is a good thing. And the steeple certainly reminds you of that. So I think it might be very fitting to end on a tribute and thank this gentleman, Dr. Pierce Lyons, for what he's given the nation and what he's given the Irish whiskey world in terms of jobs, in terms of history, and let's say sláinte to Dr. Pierce Lyons, and
Okay.
everybody stay safe and stay well. And we'll catch up soon, Conor.
Thanks for having me, Sergio, and thanks to everyone who tuned in and asked questions. And look forward to, hopefully, in the not so distant future, to be able to have a Pearse Irish whiskey with you across a bar at some stage.
Conor,
cheers.
Thank you very much, Sláinte, and look after yourself, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that, ladies and gentlemen. It was a fascinating insight into more than just a distillery and more than just a whiskey. And Conor has been a fantastic representative for the brand, fantastic representative for everybody. So thank you very much for joining us. If you have enjoyed the show, please do support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel or liking. And we will talk to you all again next week. Something a little bit different coming up next week, and we'll fill you in over the next few days. As always, stay safe. For those in the States, congratulations on a new president. Hopefully it'll be new times and a new way forward as well. So everybody take care. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.